The House Judiciary Committee will come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Present.
Representatives Edwards. Carter.
Present.
Hope. Here. Arbit.
Here.
Devendorf.
Here.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Here.
Fink.
Here.
Wenzel.
Here.
Wozniak.
Here.
Outman.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 11 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Hope to approve and adopt the minutes from the previous meeting. Thank you, Representative Hope. Those are now approved. And we are going straight to House Bill 4021 by Representative Vanderwall. We previously heard testimony on this. I have one card supporting the bill, not wishing to speak, from Tyler Woodenbush from the DNR. And I will take a motion from Representative Arbit to report House Bill 4021 with a recommendation. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Yes.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Here.
Outman.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 12 yeas, 0 nays, 0 pass. House Bill 4021 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you. I'm sure you were all here for that particular bill, but given that the committee needs to go at ease now. Folks, thank you all for being here. I'm going to apologize for the late start as we now come back to order. And we are today going to be taking up secure storage bills, which includes House Bills 4139 through 4141 and House Bill 4144, as well as the Senate Safe Storage Package, which includes Senate Bills 79 through 82. I'll just be very honest here. The reason for the delay is that we have had a lot of substitutes to accommodate changes from various stakeholders that we believe are necessary. We have taken in a lot of input from an incredible amount of people. In fact, I'm not sure who we haven't heard from, because honestly, I think I saw my kids, third grade class all weighed in, them and their parents and every single teacher. Everyone is weighed in on these packages. We are doing our best to craft the best policy possible. Because of this has caused delays. We have one person who is helping us write these bills, and this guy is doing an incredible job. So we don't want to rush this through without being deliberative and thoughtful on this entire process. So that is why we are only picking up one package today where we have the substitutes ready. And I want to start by saying to everybody, nobody wants to lose somebody to gun violence. And I want us all to, again, start with that very basic assumption that we are all here for that reason, to try to save lives, to try to mitigate violence. We may not agree on the path to do that, but the goal is the same. And right now, what we have happening in our country, in our state, what has happened at Michigan State, what has happened at Oxford and Columbine and Parkland and Sandy Hook, what happens in homes every day due to domestic violence. We recently lost a 14-year-old in northern Michigan to suicide. These are all things that we can take different measures to in order to try to stop them. So again, I ask that everybody be respectful of each other, understand that there are gun violence victims in this room, and we have respectful dialogue. And with that, we are going to start with some testimony from Representatives Braybeck and McDonnell, and I would ask that they come forward to discuss their bills on secure storage.
Thank you, Chair Breen, members of the committee. We are honored to be here this morning to be able to talk about this package. Safe storage has been a personal priority of mine since I joined the legislature in 2021, and I want to thank my colleagues, Representative McDonnell, Whitsitt, and Price, for all of their work that they've done so that to get the bill to where it is right now. All four of us, as well as the majority of our caucus who co-sponsored the bills, have strong confidence in this legislation and in the evidence showing that this kind of policy actually saves lives. And that's so important for all of us to remember. Our goal with this legislation is to save lives. And as legislators, that is where our focus should be when we're discussing these kinds of policies. With that being said, let's talk about what is in this bill. So the first bill, 4144, would require firearms to be locked and safely stored away where there is any reason to believe that it could be accessed by a child or when there is a minor in the home. This legislation would apply to firearms that are left unattended on the premises under the firearm owner's control, like one's house, for example. It would also apply to firearms left unattended at someone else's home, if that fire owner reasonably should know that it could be accessed by a minor. So what does it mean for a firearm to be locked and stored safely? There are three things. One, it has to be stored unloaded. Secondly, in a box or container, and that it's locked with a proper locking device. And that locking device ultimately prevents the firearm from discharging. To encourage and help to ease the process of Michigan's firearm owners obtaining storage and locking devices, Rep. Whitsett and Rep. Price's bills would exempt firearm safety devices from sales and use tax through 2024. And then I would also add that many of our counties throughout the state, I know that Washington does it, I believe the city of Detroit does it, offer free trigger locks for guns as well. So there are ways, if residents show up, I know, in Washington County, if a resident comes to the sheriff's office, they will be able to get a free locking device. And then Rep. McDonald's bill updates the sentencing guidelines. Again, this is widely supported, common sense legislation that will save lives. Many responsible gun owners already lock and store away their guns when they're not in use, and this bill package ensures that every Michigan gun owner will be held to that same standard. As we look back, as the chair mentioned some of the devastating school shootings, we look back at Oxford and think about what we as legislators potentially could have done differently to prevent this from occurring, and safe storage immediately comes to mind. Children should not be able to easily access their parents' firearms unattended, and I think most Michiganders, actually we know that most Michiganders agree that that's not an unreasonable sentiment to have. Oxford families in particular have been calling for our legislature to enact safe storage laws since that shooting happened in 2021. And as legislators, it would behoove us, and we must listen to the families of those who are harmed by gun violence and act now. Not only could safe storage prevent potential mass shootings in our future, these laws are also instrumental in preventing suicide in our children and teens. As many of you know, suicide accounts for over 50% of all gun-related deaths in our country. And that rate at which children commit suicide by firearm is going up year after year after year. But it's not the children aren't the ones who own those firearms. They're owned by adults in their households, and we must start holding them accountable. Regardless of circumstances, children should not be able to easily access a loaded firearm anywhere, but especially in their home. And children should not be able to hurt and potentially kill themselves or others because a loaded firearm was left available to them. This safe storage bill package helps to prevent these tragic and avoidable events by requiring guns to be locked and stored away from children and teens. It's just that straightforward. Madam Chair, thank you for your time today, and thank you to the committee. We're happy to take any questions.
Representative Fink.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for being here, Representative Brabeck, to speak to your bill. My question would be about the circumstances that might vary for different people in different places. Just as a for instance, in one of the counties that I represent, there are no sheriff's deputies on the road at night. The sheriff's department doesn't have sufficient staffing to have deputies on the road at night. And so if you're in a rural area, the first police agency that you would expect to see in response to an emergency call would be the state police. And I don't know exactly what the response times are, but even with the sheriff's department around, it's not extremely quick. I mean, it's long distances, sparsely populated parts of the state. And my counties are actually in the top half of counties by population, so I imagine that this problem is actually exacerbated if you go farther north. In discussing this set of bills with an acquaintance of mine who also lives in a rural part of the state and who had, I don't know if abusive is exactly the right term, but let's say a tense relationship that involves some threats with a former boyfriend or partner. She expressed to me that her concern was that as a single mother, when she was faced with threats from her former boyfriend, and she knew that the police could not get there as quickly as he could, that something like this legislation might present a problem for her if the first thing that she hears is, him trying to get into her house. And so my question really comes down to, do you think that this is an area where different circumstances might suggest different practices make sense rather than one size fits all for the whole state?
So one of the things that I think is challenging with any of the laws that we create is that, of course, there are going to be different circumstances that might call for different things. One of the things that I believe we have to focus on is what is going to do the most good for the most folks. And that is this package of bills. There, like I said, we could come up with outliers in every case in all the laws that we work on. But this will do the most good for the most.
There has been some discussion about immunity provisions within this bill. Are you able to speak to that? Okay.
Sure, and Bill from MAJ is here too. We actually talked about him coming up. I don't know if he's in the hallway. If we could check. Thank you so much, Tanya. So what we have done is addressed the issues around our small businesses and those smaller gun owner stores so that are not liable. Come on up.
Mr. Flory, if you don't mind.
We're talking about the immunity piece.
I was watching the other
Yeah. I said, Bill and I were just talking about this. And so it would prevent that from happening, as well as our federally licensed dealers as well. But Bill can say more.
Bill Flory, I'm with the Michigan Association for Justice. The language that's in the current act, as I think Senator Ruth Johnson pointed out when they were going over it there, is like, she questioned why you have immunity in this section, because it doesn't make a lot of sense going with the safe storage and then having a bunch of things saying that the manufacturers aren't liable when this doesn't really have anything to do with the manufacturers. This is all about the people who are selling or providing access. So it's not this isn't really a bill about manufacturing guns. This is a bill about what is a safe storage and what is going to be required to keep things safe. So we're leaving in the stuff that says federally licensed dealer, taking out the stuff that has a prohibits local units of government from bringing any claims, and the thing that says that it doesn't create any liability for damages for misuse. So that's.
So if I understand this correctly, for our federally licensed dealers, our mom and pop shops, or whether it's
or
Dickens
even
Sporting
individuals,
Goods,
because
or
you
any
can have-
individual.
there are several levels of licensed dealers.
As long as they are compliant with the rest of the laws, and let's assume that universal background checks does get implemented, as long as they do what is required by law, they'll be A-okay?
Yes. Yeah, this basically specifically says they're not liable for any damages for use or misuse as long as they have complied. So if you do the safe storage stuff and you provide the person with the information, if they don't follow it, that isn't on you, because that wouldn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, so our folks that have been in business for years and years, as long as they comply with the law, they are not liable, as they should not be, if the gun falls into the hands of a bad actor.
And that's actually the current law.
So, and as far as manufacturer liability, what is the current status of that in federal and state law?
Federal law bars any lawsuits against manufacturers.
Okay.
Yeah, so that won't really change. This just avoids having a Michigan law in case the federal law changes.
So if I'm understanding these bills correctly, we are simply asking people who own firearms to ensure that their personal responsibilities accompany their personal rights, and to ensure that we don't have the tragedies that we have seen, as Prosecutor Worthy has pointed out, where children have found firearms on their beds, behind televisions, in a variety of places, and children have unintentionally caused themselves or their family members harm.
Yeah, but those failures wouldn't attach to the dealer. They would be on the person that failed to do that. The dealer's responsibility in this is to make sure they have the information about it and they have a lock and so forth.
Okay. Does anybody have any? Representative Hope?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here this afternoon or morning, whatever it is. I lost all concept of time. One of the questions I get regarding this particular safe storage package is how would it be enforced? So there are some pretty obvious examples that might come to mind, but maybe less obviously, like if someone's minor child accidentally or intentionally harms or kills himself, would that person be prosecuted? Would the person be prosecuted if there's a theft from a home and it's determined that, well, that person didn't have their gun securely stored? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I would take a crack at it, but we have attorneys here and I'm not an attorney. So I would, Tanya, do you mind coming up? We have Tanya from Brady, because I anticipated that there are going to be some questions that were really specific.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Tanya Shart. I'm Senior Counsel and Director of State and Federal Policy at Brady. Thank you all so much for having me today. I think that's a really tragic example, and I think the first thing to consider when you're talking about safe storage laws is the goal here is not to punish or prosecute people. The goal here really is to effectuate behavioral change. It's imperative that we start treating safely storing a firearm the same way that we treat putting on a seatbelt, keeping your child away from dangerous medications or house cleaning products. We need to really ensure that it is the norm to safely store your firearm. So that's the priority. That's the goal here. That's the intention. There are going to be cases where people will be prosecuted, and certainly instances where a child has harmed themselves. It's devastating, and I think we're going to have to rely on prosecutional, like their preference, and I think they're going to have to think thoughtfully about whether or not they prosecute those cases. But it's important to establish the standards and for the standards to carry with it a penalty so that people understand that these are really important, these are really important ways to maintain and safely secure a firearm.
Thank you. Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rep. Maybe for your counsel.
Sure.
My understanding reading this is that two requirements of the gun owner is one, to store the firearm in a lockbox or container, or keep the firearm unloaded and locked with a locking device. And it doesn't really say anything about a box. But then the duty goes further if there's a minor in the house to make sure that it goes into a lockbox. So is that the way is that correct?
Yeah, the way I read it is if you know or have reasonable cause to believe that there will be a minor in the area and you're not possessing the firearm yourself, that it has to be contained either in a locked box or it needs to be locked with a trigger lock or something else and unloaded.
Okay. Trigger lock is sufficient if there's no minor in the house?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a really quick question. So I do agree with the safe storage of firearms package, but I understand that the locks are $8 to $700. Can you restate where individuals can get the free trigger locks?
Sure. The ones that I know about are in Washtenaw County. Residents can get them. I was talking to one of our colleagues who gets to represent Detroit, and he said that he thought that was the same there. I also actually have a question in, and I'm happy to follow up. I have a question into our sheriff's department in Washtenaw County to see where else this happens in the state. And I was talking with him last night about that. And so he is going to be getting back to me about that so that we can get that information out to residents so they know that. But the cost is variable, and there are places where our residents can get those for free.
Thank you, because I know that's one of the concerns. If we can't afford it, what
That's
are
right.
the other options?
What do you do?
Right.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
There have been some questions raised about making certain storage devices tax-free. Are you able to talk a little bit about that? Either you or Mr. Flory or the representative from Brady.
So in the bill, they're not. Both the trigger, any secure storage device is tax and use free. That's in the package. Mm-hmm. So, it's part of the package. I don't know if I'm missing part
Just
of your
to make
question.
sure that we're trying to make these things more affordable
Yes.
and accessible. I know,
Yes.
I believe every police department in my district does offer trigger locks for
that's
free.
great. Yeah.
So I know for sure I walked into, for example, Northville City Hall, and they were right there
Yep.
in a basket for people to use. So I personally would encourage people, if they need a trigger lock, to check with their local police department to see if this is something that is available to them for free. Do you have something else to add to that?
No, I think that's a wonderful framework. I think the purpose here is to incentivize people to create new norms around safe storage. So whatever we can do to normalize safely storing a firearm, we'd be supportive. I think a tax incentive is a wonderful framework for that.
There also are discussions in play about doing what we can to incentivize people to take training courses and other safety courses, because we do want people, as they use firearms, to do so in a responsible manner and to know how to best store and use them for whatever purposes they need. So those are discussions that are taking place. Representative Hope, you have a follow-up question? Okay. Representative Fink, you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to follow up a little bit on this discussion of the liability issue for sellers and manufacturers. I understand that this language as amended in this, or it's, I guess, as remaining in what would remain in the law with this sub, in other words, what is not stricken from that liability section, would only apply to FFLs, right? So in a private sale, a seller would still, a seller between a non-FFL and a buyer, there would still be potential liability for the seller there for the actions of the buyer, right?
There's a private,
I mean, it says if you're a federally licensed firearms dealer,
right. So,
right? So if you're not a licensed dealer and you're just a private, I mean,
Yes, and that also matches the federal law, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. It only protects federally licensed firearms dealers.
right. And then I guess then my last question on this line would be, you mentioned that if we remove this, then if federal law were to change, then Michigan would also not have there would be no issue with suing a manufacturer because the weapon was dangerous if the federal law were to change. I mean, that's the state of play if we remove this language from Michigan law. So,
yes.
I mean,
Yeah, the Michigan law doesn't trump the federal law. The federal law trumps the Michigan law. And if the federal law goes away, then the Michigan law, if it were still here, would fall into place. And we'd end up kind of like we have with the drug immunity, where we're often left out. So
left out of what?
Larger lawsuits, like the opioid one. Individuals don't have any right to bring a case on the opioids.
So I just want to make sure I followed your testimony to say you want this removed so that if federal law is changed, then there would be liability for manufacturers.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Just to clarify, there's nothing about right now that is to repeal that law that I'm aware of.
Oh, I mean, there's a federal bill to repeal the law, but I mean, I don't think it's moving at any time soon. The one thing I'll add is just like when we're talking about potential liability for manufacturers, it's not, oh, a gun is dangerous, I'm going to sue the manufacturer. It would be a failure on their part that you could pursue a claim against them. If we were to repeal PLACA and we were somehow able to repeal this, there would still have to be an act or a failure to act on behalf of the manufacturer that resulted in harm to somebody.
Yeah, basic tort law is always there has to be a duty, a breach of the duty, and causation and injury. So if somebody created a duty on behalf of gun manufacturers to create non-harmful ones, then maybe there might be a claim, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Representative Wenzel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. So you mentioned earlier that these bills are, as I understand, to impact behavior, right, to promote people. But you said 80% of Michiganders support these bills in safe storage. So isn't it assumed that 80% of Michiganders are already doing this, and the 20% that maybe don't support it, this isn't really going to affect them? Impact them?
At the risk of harming children and children dying, I wouldn't make that assumption. I think it's fair to create a mandate and to ensure that we are actually effectuating this change. Unfortunately, research has shown that while parents believe that children don't know where their guns are, they do. And we've seen this, I was very quickly Googling, I think 2 children died late last year in Michigan because of access to a firearm. We have an obligation, I think, to protect our children. We do it with so many other items. It makes no sense that we're not doing it with firearms.
Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the idea of penalties for theft, can you comment on the contrast between a severe penalty for stealing a gun? Certainly there's different circumstances where they use the gun, or they just possess the gun. When we think of stealing someone's prescription drugs and either committing suicide with it or reselling it or whatever, there's a definite penalty with that. Stealing someone's car, doing damage to somebody else, causing an accident, and certainly stealing a gun would be very serious. Can you comment on the contrast between the penalty for theft
Sure, and
versus
I'm
this?
not, I'm not aware of the exact penalty that's tied to theft of a firearm. I think it would probably depend on the value of the firearm, actually, but I imagine that there is already something in Michigan code that would make it unlawful for somebody, even a minor, to steal a gun. I think that's already built into Michigan code.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
We have 2 people that are present that wish to speak in opposition to the bills. Given the time constraints, I ask that they limit their comments to about 2 minutes and to speak just to the bills that we are taking up today. Mr. Austin Krautz and a Tom Lambert. Are they present?
No, I saw one of them in the overflow room.
Okay. Sergeants, if they wish to speak and they're in the overflow room, they're welcome. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I know that you have been here before, and I apologize due to the time constraints, but we have a few minutes. If you could just speak to the secure storage bills.
The problem that I see with this bill is home invasion. My brother-in-law had a home invasion. To have these bills in place, when you have a home invasion situation, to say, hey, wait a minute, I got to go get my gun, I got to pull out my trigger thing, I got to load the gun, and if you just stand there, then maybe I can defend myself. None of these bills that have come before this committee on gun control, not gun violence, gun control, will stop anything like the Michigan State disaster, the Oxford disaster, etc. 2 things are what are needed. The first thing that's needed is the mental health issues, and the second thing that's needed is the early release of well-known criminals, like in the Michigan State disaster, who are allowed to leave an early release.
Sir, please limit to the.
I am. Just hold on a second.
These bills.
Yes, I am.
I absolutely agree. We need to improve mental health.
Okay, just mental health is part of this. To have us in a situation like myself where I cannot defend myself for home invasion and other things, to have all of my guns locked up makes no sense whatsoever. I would refer you to John Lott's testimony. Look at it again. None of what you're doing will stop gun violence. Responsible gun owners will take the necessary means to store their weapons, but also we need to have a provision in here that we can have a loaded firearm that is easy to access, particularly in areas of high crime where people can defend themselves. Please consider some type for a change of amendment to some of the bills that you're passing. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Sir, I do have a quick question for you.
Yes.
Are you familiar with some of the devices? And I know these might be more expensive, but we're going to see what we can do to address some of these issues. Safes or guns that have biometric aspects to them so that they are coded, and it would be, from what I understand, a split second for somebody in order to access that weapon if they do need to defend themselves.
Problem with those type of devices is it's limited to one person. Now, I'm here in Lansing. My wife is back in Allegan. And if somebody came in and the biometric of the gun would only work for one person, she's defenseless. Education, and I will say this, education is what is also needed. But the ability to quickly access with all members of the family. And the fallacy of this bill is that children also who are in families that have guns learn how to use those guns and certainly know the combination to the safe. You're not going to stop a child from walking in, dialing the dials on the safe to prevent a suicide. Common sense, folks. We have to have a provision that allows a loaded weapon readily accessible, particularly in high crime areas. Because I'll give you this last example. We had somebody knocking on our door at 12:30 at night. All right, we don't know who it is or what's going on. I took my Glock with me, perfect stranger. The person's trying to get into the house. The moment he sees I have a weapon, he turns around and leaves. If I can't access that weapon immediately, my wife, my household is in peril. It's a necessity that you have some type of a provision that, particularly in high crime areas, that an individual can quickly have a loaded weapon on hand to defend himself. This bill that you're talking about, if I lock everything up, I can't say to the guy on my door, can you wait a minute till I load my weapon? Oh, by the way, I got to get that trigger thing out, and I got to do the combination as well on my safe. These are things that are realities, folks. These are things that are reality. What we should be doing is attending to the fact that some of these people that we release early
Sir,
are,
sir,
just
thank
excuse
you.
me,
No,
I'm
I'm
getting
asking you
to
to
the
take-
end. Let me just summarize here.
Sir,
Get guns that are not
sir,
registered, etc. We got to take care of
sir.
that as well.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Lambert, again, please limit to the safe storage bills. Thank you. And 2 minutes max.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Overall, we hear that the public wants something and that these are an answer to what the public wants. The problem is that is a gigantic bait and switch. The public generally favors people storing firearms and other objects safely. Okay, yeah, everybody supports that. If you were to ask them specific questions of, do you require this kind of thing, these specific provisions, making sure they have these kind of mandates, those numbers drop down significantly. And one of the biggest things in this bill is you've heard individualized circumstances. I forgot the representative that asked the question about individualized circumstances, but it's exactly right. And the answer was effectively a non-answer, that, well, we have to make decisions that aren't perfect. I get that. But there are many laws that already exist today, many bills already on the books or already been introduced that create laws based on individualized circumstances. This legislature, this body, is very, very well practiced at doing exactly that. And so why don't we do it here? Why don't we meet the expectations of the public? Why don't we meet the expectations of people who want to reduce gun violence? Why don't we meet the expectations of members of the firearm community who may agree with liability in an individualized circumstance? We also get a gigantic bait and switch in the notion that there is no existence or any laws in existence today. We've heard testimony from many different prosecutors, both here and in the Senate, that have given very specific examples that they prosecuted over many misdemeanors and serious felonies for examples, again, that they've given. Again, that's existing law. So here today we have a couple misdemeanors and some felonies based on, we'll look at it, individualized circumstances. We do show that we can, at least in some way, tailor the bill to individualized circumstances. But then why does it create a one-size-fits-all obligation? That doesn't make sense. Why does it create a one-size-fits-all obligation when, again, we already have many existing laws on the books? If you were to ask the public, are you required to store your firearms safely today? I'm sure many of the people that say, well, we need this legislation would say no. And unfortunately, they'd be wrong. You are required. You can be charged, again, with multiple felonies, multiple misdemeanors. It happens already under existing law. That's not to say we need to do nothing. Don't get me wrong. But overreaching, creating one size fits all that doesn't, that's not a good policy for the state. It's not a good policy that's going to weather the test of time. That's important. As for some of the liability stuff that you heard testimony on, unfortunately, it was very, very wrong. I hate to say it, you received a lot of very significant misinformation on the liability provisions that are in this bill. I'd like to sum it up with, you heard existing law, that if we remove these provisions in the law, then we permit, or removing the provisions in this bill, permit lawsuits against manufacturers based on product defects, things like that, where you heard about the duty that under normal tort law, you have to breach that duty. That's already in the provisions that you're eliminating. So I don't understand why we need to eliminate the provisions that already allow for the thing that they want in order to have the thing that they want. I question the honesty of that testimony based on those facts. And you can look right in the bill. On page, page 7, it goes down to line 17 and starts by striking out subsections 8, subsections 9, subsections 10, all the way through 13. If we go to page 8, roughly in the middle.
Sir, we do have some questions. Representative Devendorf?
Yeah, thank you for being here. I wanted to address this bill in particular and address some specific things that have been said so far. I personally know that storage works. I was raised in a home with a gun because my dad was a police officer. He was a police officer that hated guns and stored his gun responsibly. And at a certain point, when we were all grown adults sitting around the table at a family gathering, myself and my 3 siblings, all casually shared that at some point, all of us had sought out where that gun was stored and tried to access it and failed. Depression is something that many folks in my family deal with. Any one of those attempts could have ended in a suicide or something catastrophic. My father, after doing his very best to keep us safe that whole time, successfully heard this and started crying. He is the loveliest, most generous person that I know. And he did the right thing. My hope is that we can make storage accessible to everybody, regardless of income. Make it as easy as possible to, yes, protect our kids who should not be able to easily get into our storage boxes and bypass our locks, because it works. And it worked in my family. I know it's working in other families where it's being used.
Thank you,
Forgive me,
Representative.
was there a question?
Sure.
Forgive me, the chair said there was a question.
I thought there was a question, but thank you for sharing that story. I understand that was difficult.
I feel it's important that I answer what seems to be a question from some of our advocates speaking against some storage. I feel the question is looming whether it works or not, and I want to ensure folks that it works.
Okay.
Representative, thank you for that statement. And that's kind of what I was getting to in the beginning. Saying those people who bring up these concerns are opposed to storage, that's a false dichotomy. I started this very testimony by saying this isn't an opposition to storage. The gun community itself supports people storing firearms responsibly. It's just, what is that responsibly? We understand that can tailor to specific circumstances. And to be clear, if you vote in favor of this bill today, you're voting in favor of minors having access to firearms. Maybe that sounds weird. where all the comments have been minors shouldn't have access to firearms, but there are provisions in this bill that specifically pertain, that allow minors to have access to firearms even without parental consent. Are we paying attention to what we're voting on? Are we reading this stuff? Or are we just going off of the general talking points that don't necessarily apply to this specific language? Again, it is the specific language that we're talking about. It is the attempt to find that common ground that we're talking about. If we ignore that and we just push this stuff through because of talking points, then we end up with bad policy, or most likely bad policy that doesn't stand the test of time.
Okay, sir, we have another question. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for being here. What are your suggestions? I'm a single woman in a house by myself. Rarely have children around, but if they are around, then I use a gun safe and everything gets locked up and I'm not going to have to worry about it. What's your suggestion for a situation for single women, high crime areas, or maybe not even that, but so we can still have a feeling that we can defend ourselves and stay within confines of law?
Representative, thank you for the question, and forgive me for the vague answer, but it depends. It depends on the circumstances of that individual, and that's my whole point. If you have very young children around, they're, let's say, a 2-year-old. I have a 2-year-old at home. That 2-year-old is going to get into a heck of a lot less than like my 9, soon 10-year-old will. So the circumstances of what constitutes safe storage can be very different in each individual's, again, circumstances. So let's say the woman in your scenario has a 2-year-old. She might be able to reasonably keep that firearm away from that 2-year-old, but still have plenty of access to it for her own individual circumstances. And I just recently helped yet another person dealing with domestic violence that fled her home with literally just the clothes on her back because she feared for her life with her children.
Thank you, sir.
So I'd like to finish answering that question.
We do have one other question after that. Okay.
May I finish?
I just want to clarify, and I probably didn't ask it correctly. I'm concerned that if everything's locked up and I have no risk of children around, I can't access self-defense.
Ma'am, the law would not apply to you. If you do not have children around, the law it's not a concern.
That's not quite correct. It's if you
That is correct, sir. That is what the law literally says.
Let's go read the law.
We do have one more question from Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lambert, I find your comments on the individualization really interesting with regard to this bill and compliance. Do you see that there's any way you could prove violation of compliance prior to something happening? This seems like it's all after the fact.
I agree. It is all after the fact. And that I think you heard testimony on this won't necessarily prevent some crimes, and that's fair and honest testimony, and it's good to hear. And we shouldn't hold this bill up to a standard of preventing every single scenario. I want to agree with that testimony. But yes, it does apply after the fact. And let's be clear, the bill starts off in the very beginning. Starts off with Section 9, subsection 1. An individual who stores or leaves a firearm unattended on premises under the individual's control, which would be the example in this case, and who knows or reasonably should know that a minor is, okay, if there's no minor, not the example, or likely to be present on the premises, shall do one of the following. So yes, the bill does apply to premises where minors aren't necessarily present. If you know that the minor is or likely to be present, then this absolutely could apply to you. But to go back and finish answering the question, again, if you have a 2-year-old, safe storage looks very different than if you have a 17-year-old. We heard stories from the representative over here about if you're older, you are much more intelligent and can do a lot more to try and get into a safe or any sort of lockbox. And ultimately, the issue of storage is a balancing test. On one side, you have storage. On the other side, you need accessibility. And usually, when the more you go one way or the other, you have to give up the other side. The more you store something, the less accessibility you have. Generally, but not always, the more accessibility you have, the less storage you have. Thankfully, technology is making many, many great strides to bridge that gap. That
Sir,
allows
and I do have a question then. From what I understand, the biometric safes and firearms that we've heard about before, they can be coded to more than one individual.
they can.
Okay. And you're aware of studies that show that approximately less than 1% of violent crimes are stopped by the quote-unquote good guy with a gun.
It depends on, so we've heard lots of statistics. And then we get lots of bait and switch in those statistics too. I know one of the statistics we've heard in this committee on these bills, so I'm narrowing my testimony to just this bill, is that firearms are the leading cause of death among children.
Correct.
Well, that's when you include 18 and 19-year-olds. And when you start looking at different things like gang violence, I think it was Dr. Lott testified to exactly that here in this committee.
Is that not a life?
But it
Lost to
has
gun violence?
very different circumstances and a very different solution. Forgive me for broadening it out just a little bit, but to illustrate my point, if we deal with a mass shooter, let's use Michigan State University, the motivation behind that person is incredibly different than a minor who happens to find a firearm at home and is looking at it and doesn't know what they're looking at.
So you would agree violence is multifaceted and requires different solutions in order to mitigate it?
Yes, but when we take all of these causes and we lump them all into one thing, and then we use that one statistic that you're now using it for something where it's no longer an honest use of it, when you have the majority of the statistic pertaining to things like gang violence, and you say, well, we need this
The
for
gang
safe.
violence isn't pertinent to the secure storage bill.
Is exactly right, and that's exactly my point, Madam Chair. If you use a statistic that is driven in significant part by gang violence,
So then you're saying that because gang violence can't be addressed by secure storage, we should not do this bill?
no, Madam Chair, I'm trying to explain to you exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying if we use a statistics that is substantially driven by gang violence to support safe storage.
And what percentage of those deaths by minors do you think is attributable to gang violence? Because that is not the data that we have.
Dr. Lott talked to relatively exactly what those statistics are. I would defer to him as to the exact number. But we do know it is a significant portion, more than half, I believe, if that's correct, especially when you look at the 18 to 19-year-olds that, again, skew the statistic. That's, again, one of those big bait and switches. We tell the public, how many times? Firearms are the leading cause of death among children. Well, if you go ask the public if they believe that statistic pertains to 18 to 19-year-olds, I'm going to guess vast majority of them will tell you no. They're being misled about these statistics.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to respectfully disagree because the data that we have shows that firearms are, in fact, the leading cause of death for children. Again, there are still children that are dying, as Prosecutor Worthy testified, because firearms repeatedly are left out and they are accessible by children, and that is the intent of these bills. Representative Arbit has a question for you.
That pertain to those scenarios.
Sir, Representative Arbit has a question.
I just wanted to clarify something with you. You're saying that this. Am I correct in assessing that you are saying that the statistics on gun violence being the leading cause of death among children is inaccurate because 18 and 19-year-olds because they can vote are not considered children?
Numbers don't lie, people do. And that usually comes in the form of people applying titles and names to the numbers that it doesn't necessarily apply to.
So when a mother buries her 18 or 19-year-old child due to gun violence, that is not a child that she is burying in your estimation?
Does not the same standard apply to a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old and 22-year-old and 23-year-old?
I would believe that it does, yes. Do you?
Okay.
And so let's say the firearms are the
Sir, I'm sorry. I do actually appreciate your well thought out, and you testify very well in opposition, and I appreciate your input. We do, however, have to move on to the vote.
Madam Chair, I do have more testimony, and
we've gone way over what I thought we would. I appreciate you being here. I'm happy to have a continued discussion with you offline.
I'd like it to be on the record that this limitation that you've applied has been applied exclusively and only to people in opposition of these bills.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
I just want to be clear, you recognize that?
Sir, we have to move on to the vote. Thank you.
You recognize that as applied?
Appreciate you being here. I will now take a motion to adopt sub H1 from Representative McDonnell. Motion by Representative Edwards to adopt sub H1. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
To adopt the substitute H1 to House Bill 4139.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
To adopt Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 2 nays, 3 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We are now reporting with recommendation as substitute H1, House Bill 4139. I need a motion to do that. Representative Devendorf. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 4 nays, 1 pass. House Bill 4139 is reported with recommendation as substitute H1.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Hope to adopt sub H2 for House Bill 4140. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 5 pass. Substitute H2 to House Bill 4140 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now take a motion from Representative Carter to report HB 4140 with recommendation as sub H2 from Representative Carter. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
Nope.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 4 nays, 1 pass. House Bill 4140 is reported with recommendation as substitute H2.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Sergalu to adopt sub H2 for House Bill 4141. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel.
Yes.
Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 5 pass. Substitute H2 is adopted.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Arbit to report House Bill 4141 with recommendation as sub H2. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 5 nays, 0 pass. House Bill 4141 is reported with recommendation as substitute H2.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Edwards to adopt sub H1 for House Bill 4144. Please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Arbit.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel.
Pass.
Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 5 pass. The substitute H1 to House Bill 4144 is adopted.
Thank you. I will now take another motion from Representative Edwards to report House Bill 4144 with recommendation as sub H1. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 5 nays, 0 pass. House Bill 4144 is reported with recommendation as substitute H1.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now take a motion from Representative Carter to adopt sub H1 for Senate Bill 79 from Senator Bayer. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel.
Pass.
Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman.
Pass.
Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 5 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now take a motion to report Senate Bill 79 as sub H1 with recommendation by Representative Hope. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 5 nays, 0 pass. Senate Bill 79 is reported with recommendation as substitute H1.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Edwards to adopt sub H1 for Senate Bill 80. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
I didn't hear.
Yes.
Haskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
Pass.
Wenzel.
Pass.
Wozniak.
Pass.
Outman. Johnson.
Pass.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 0 nays, 5 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you. I will now take a motion to report SB 80 with recommendation as sub H1 from Representative Hope. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 5 nays, 0 pass. Senate Bill 80 is reported with recommendation as substitute H1.
Thank you. I will now take a motion from Representative Devendorf to report SB 81 with recommendation. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Haskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 5 nays, 0 pass. Senate Bill 81 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you. And finally, I will take a motion from Representative Edwards to report SB 82 with recommendation. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Breen.
Aye.
Representatives Edwards.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Hope. Yes. Arbet.
Yes.
Devendorf.
Yes.
Hoskins. Cerniglu.
Yes.
Fink.
No.
Wenzel.
No.
Wozniak.
No.
Outman.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 7 yeas, 5 nays, 0 pass. Senate Bill 82 is reported with recommendation.
I will now take a motion from Representative Sergalu to excuse absent members. Thank you. And seeing no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned.